Welcome back to another Smackdown review on this Friday evening with me, Mr. Parkin, on behalf of the British Fist. If you have any comments on this show or the WWE products in general, you know where to put those comments and thoughts, guys, in the comment section below. And let's get straight on to this edition of Smackdown. So we open up this week's edition of Smackdown with the GMs with no power, Vicky Guerrero and Brad Maddox. And they just talked for a while. I kind of tuned out, if I'm honest with you. You have Daniel Bryan coming out to a pretty good pop to basically tease that Big Show was going to be there in some capacity, and he also brings out the Rhodes Brothers, who get no mic time, which kind of bothered me a little bit. It kind of just went straight from the Rhodes Brothers to blah, 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 Vicky Guerrero, blah, 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 and I was like, you know, these guys who just won the belts, at least give them a bit of mic time on SmackDown. Just a little qualm, in my opinion, but basically it led to the main event being Daniel Bryan and the Rhodes Brothers versus The Shield. So, if nothing else, it gave us a main event, even though this opening promo segment I didn't really feel was really all that entertaining, but as for the main event of Raw this week, which has been talked about quite a lot in the YWC, the Rhodes Brothers won the Tag Team Championships from The Shield in the main event of Raw. You know, this could have been done on a pay-per-view, and it probably would have felt a little bit more special doing it that way, but let's face it, right now ratings are quite low for WWE, and they're looking for something big to put in a main event and have some kind of payoff which may pop a rating, and I'm not sure if it did pop a rating this week. The breakdown isn't really there, but the rating improved slightly. But we really need to see the breakdowns before we really see whether this or not accomplished what it did. But either way, WWE did a good job. If it wasn't going to be a pay-per-view, they did a good job making this feel like a big deal. They put a very good story behind it. They had it in the main event of the show. They built up to it quite well. So I say this is one of the things WWE did do very well on Raw this week. They actually had the Tag Team Championships in the main event and showcased characters like Cody Rhodes, you know, old school characters like Goldust and The Shield, who are newer characters on the scene. So at least this main event of Raw, we got to see something different in regards a main event capacity than what we probably usually get on Raw, which is generally Daniel Bryan and Randy Orton. The Wyatt family were involved in this week's edition of SmackDown, facing the Miz and Kofi Kingston combination. And the Wyatt family, as we kind of probably predicted here, got the win after getting a pin on Kofi Kingston, who right now is kind of irrelevant, so he's pretty much playing jobber right now. He's pretty much playing the jobber. And then we get Bray Wyatt cutting another one of his promos on Miz, which are generally quite entertaining because they're very unique, and you know, you've heard it all from me before, you don't need to hear it from me again. Now, the one thing that's really dominated the dirt sheets this week is the fact that Bray Wyatt got injured at a live event and they're not sure when he's going to be returning, but I hope that they will use his mic skills. He's one of those characters, in my opinion, that doesn't need to go into the ring and wrestle. They can just use his mic skills in creepy video packages or him sitting in his chair. So I hope, even though we won't have a match at Hell in a Cell now, I hope they build up a match going to him towards Survivor Series, which is a Big Four pay-per-view, and they at least try to keep using him in some respect while helping him rest his body. The only problem with Bray Wyatt right now is he's getting quite a lot of injuries. He got an injury before he actually came on TV, so if this guy is injury-prone, should they be giving him such a big push? You know, these kind of things do factor in with characters. You know, one of the great characters, you know, people like Bruno Sammartino and Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, you know, people, you know, they never really got injured, and so you can give them a prolonged push and trust them with the belt or with a long-term storyline. So injuries do kind of get in the way of this sometimes. So AJ Lee had a match with Brie Bella, and basically this was a way of hot-shotting Brie Bella into the #1 contendership position so she could presumably face AJ Lee at Hell in a Cell. I didn't really pay too much attention to the match. I probably won't pay too much attention to the match if I watch Hell in a Cell. So, to be honest with you, it's another Diva segment that I wasn't really too bothered about, even though, you know, I can see the logic here. Brie Bella getting a pin on AJ Lee, which means she has beaten the champion and gotten a #1 contendership. It's just simple writing sometimes, which I wish WWE would try and avoid. Try and do it in a more unique way, even for the Divas, which, like, probably aren't going to draw that great ratings or that many pay-per-view buys. But let's at least try from the bottom upwards to try and build this show up from a writing perspective. You know, this really puzzled me. Big Show was just allowed to walk from the crowd and in the ring to cut a promo, even though he is fired and even though they said they had security all around the building. Okay, so even if he did get through security, you think security would still be trying to stop him? Let's just step back here a little bit. Let's just say this was a fan. If there was a fan, it would be totally different. And this is one of the reasons why, even though people know wrestling is a work and they know it's kind of fake and scripted, etc., this is one of the reasons why people don't buy into wrestling anymore. Because you get Big Show coming from the crowd doing what a fan couldn't do. So it's not really that realistic, is it? When you have Big Show coming to the ring to cut a promo, even though he's fired. You know, you'd think WWE would put a little bit more thought behind this and be a little bit more realistic in the way they actually write and book segments like this, because this is quite an interesting storyline. You know, Big Show being off and Big Show helping Cody Rhodes and Goldust to win the belts by coming from the crowd in that no DQ match on Raw. This could be a quite interesting little side storyline they could do, but just allowing him to walk through the crowd to the ring to cut a promo. And even though he had the microphone, if you don't want him talking, why don't you just cut the guy off? You know, again, it's just these little things kind of bug me in the way wrestling is presented sometimes and how they're in their own little bubble with the way things work when they need to get to reality sometimes. CM Punk versus Big E Langston was pretty interesting. I mean, they had a pretty competitive match, which I thought did well for the Big E Langston character, as we haven't really seen too much of him. He hasn't really been showcased brilliantly lately, so for him to have a competitive, quite long match with CM Punk did a load of good in sort of helping him sort of get up there a little bit as a mid-carder. And, you know, the post-match angle as well, I'll talk about that because, let's face it, at the end of the day, the match doesn't really matter. You know, if you're an average viewer, you're going to really want to pay more attention to the angle that happened after the matches. That is what generally drives storylines forward and interest forward. We got the 2-on-1 attack with Punk by Axel and Ryback, and then we get Big E Langston turning babyface, which had been rumoured at many points in time. In NXT, he was a babyface. He was one of the more over babyfaces on the NXT roster at the time. So Big E Langston turning babyface, yeah, this is good. You know, I really think this is good because we need more, we need more big guys as babyfaces in the WWE sometimes. And if WWE give him the 5 gimmick, which they probably won't do, they'll probably give him some generic face big guy gimmick while they're there. But the fact of the matter is, Big E Langston is face. It looks like we have a new opponent for Curtis Axel now, who looks somewhat credible, mainly because of his size. So this, in my opinion, accomplished really what it should have done and got Big E Langston over in a good way, involving being a side pawn in a big kind of storyline right now. So this was pretty good, in my opinion. Alberto Del Rio had an in-ring interview with Josh Matthews, and it didn't really seem like anybody in the crowd cared about what he had to say. And to be honest with you, neither did I. You know, I don't care about Alberto Del Rio right now. I just don't give a shit about the character. Without Ricardo Rodriguez, he's just another bland character, in my opinion, that has been pushed way too much by the WWE. And then he did the cross-arm breaker on Josh Matthews, which I was kind of laughing at, but, you know, that is that. And, you know, at the end of the day, Del Rio can say all he likes, but at the end of the day, we all know John Cena is going to waltz in on Hell in a Cell, is going to defeat Alberto Del Rio 100% clean on his match back, and that's what's going to happen. John Cena is going to be the World Heavyweight Champion. We all know it's going to happen, let's face it, unless they have Damien Sandow involved in there somehow, and he wasn't involved on this week's edition of Smackdown, which I would have thought Sandow would have been involved in Smackdown just a little bit personally. And, you know, at least this will lead to one good thing, though. It'll mean that Del Rio will finally be out of the World Heavyweight Championship picture, and it seems like he's been in there for years. It seems like this guy is never, ever out of the World Heavyweight Championship picture. It's time to get him out of there, even though John Cena will be World Heavyweight Champion. I'm sure a lot of smarks will be, you know, going on about that as if it's a bad thing, even though really it'll bring a little bit more prestige to the World Heavyweight Championship picture and maybe give us another reason to watch SmackDown. The Usos had a match against the Real Americans, and in this show I found out that apparently the Usos are still #1 contenders. I didn't know that. You know, you think if they're #1 contenders, how did Cody Rhodes and Goldust get the shot at the Tag Team Championships? You know, beats me. You know, they're once again showcasing the hell out of that Antonio Cesaro swing, which makes me kind of feel somewhere down the line they may turn him babyface, even though I think he would be a bit of a boring-ass babyface in my opinion. Just my opinion from what I've seen of Antonio Cesaro. I'm not paying any attention to what I've seen on the indie circuits and how good he is in the ring or anything like that. I'm not saying he's a terrible wrestler. I'm just saying, as a babyface, I can kind of see Cesaro's gimmick just being really bland and boring. That's just me. But this segment did give me my LOL moment of the evening. We had El Matadores coming out, and we had the bull-goring Zeb Coulter, which I felt was kind of funny. And, you know, when the Usos got the win, and after everything happened, and all the storyline continuance was ended, I was thinking, you know what? This isn't a bad little feud for Los Matadores. It makes a lot of sense with the Real Americans and Zeb Coulter on commentary going on about Los Matadores not being American and what are their names and blah, 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 and all that. So the Los Matadores versus Real Americans feud does make a lot of sense, especially if you want to put Los Matadores over as this big tag team. So it'll be a good feud, which makes a little bit of cultural sense going forward for the company, especially in the tag team division now, where it seems like things are really kicking off and we have a lot of tag teams. And then we get to our main event of the evening, but before we actually got to the main event match, we have Randy Orton sort of coming out and cutting a promo. I'm thinking, that's right, WWE, play to Orton's strengths with a promo segment. That's all I'll say. But to be honest, as a heel, his talking has got a lot better and he's more suited to the role. And I felt this was a good promo, talking about how Daniel Bryan will never beat him and how he'll never be the face of the company and all that kind of stuff. So all in all, Orton, I think, did a good job here on the mic, considering his lack of mic skills, what you would see. As for the main event match, Daniel Bryan and the Rhodes Brothers versus The Shield, this was quite a fast-paced, chaotic main event, and I must admit, I did enjoy this. I watched the whole thing, although there were times where I was thinking, slow down a little bit, don't do 2 moves in a row, sell it, tell the story, make some crowd psychology, get the crowd into it. The crowd were into it, but at times I was thinking, just slow down a little bit, just a little bit, so, we can digest this. But I did enjoy this main event. I thought it was pretty good. And Daniel Bryan gets the pin on Dean Ambrose, and it makes him look strong going into Hell in a Cell. You got the Rose Brothers there, who also would have got the win, so that's making them look strong going forward, which they needed to do after they won the Tag Team Championships on Raw. So all in all, another main event, which, it was a pretty good wrestling match. Didn't really leave too much to be desired towards the end. There was no real angle or anything like that, which would make me think, right, I've got to tune into Raw next week or tune into Smackdown next week. But a solid main event. That's all I'll say about that. There isn't really too much else to say about it, really, in my opinion. You know what, this week I thought this was a pretty good Smackdown. Generally one of the things that hurt Smackdown a lot of the time, it was very wrestling orientated, and there was no real storyline continuance, or not enough of it really to keep me interested in the show. But lately we've been getting some pretty good storyline continuance in the WWE. You've got the Real Americans versus Us Matadores feud going on. They've continued on the CM Punk and Ryback feud in an interesting way. Turned Biggie Langston babyface, maybe giving him some relevancy in there. You had also like the Big Show segment, even though I didn't think it was good, at least it's continuing on a storyline. The Wyatt family continuing on a story. So at least, if nothing else, there were some segments on this show. While some of them may have been a little bit at least a lot of them went a good way to continue on storylines, which generally SmackDown hasn't really been known to do in the past, apart from when Mark Henry was champion, blah, 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 blah. I do wonder when Sheamus is going to be coming back, though. I think SmackDown is missing one thing, and maybe they'll be bringing through John Cena as their ultimate babyface on SmackDown. I do wonder when Sheamus is going to come back and what they're going to do with him. Are they going to turn him heel? Are they going to involve him in this big storyline with Triple H as COO and Daniel Bryan, etc.? I'm just interested in that. But anyway, a decent to good edition of SmackDown this week. I did find myself skipping through some of the matches, but I felt the post-that-match angle, which generally is the stuff that matters most when you're a TV viewer and looking at ratings, etc., and what's important. That stuff was pretty well done this week, in my opinion. So give me your thoughts on this edition of SmackDown down in the comment section below. Watch out for my NXT review tomorrow, which is going to involve Bo Dallas versus Sami Zayn, a big match in NXT history there. So tune in for NXT on Saturday, which is tomorrow night. Comment down below. That's been it from me, Mr. Parkin. On behalf of the British Fist for this SmackDown review, comment down below. And thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.